After developing over 2,300 affordable homes, I've learned one hard truth. Most deals don't collapse because of bad ideas. They collapse from problems that nobody saw coming. I'm Evan Holiday, and in over 12 years of developing, I've seen countless deals fall apart, including my own when I was just getting started. Today, I'm breaking down the 5 biggest deal killers for first-time affordable housing developers, or really any developer needs to know. And not only am I going to tell you what they are, but I'm also going to show you the strategies that I've used to survive these hits or even prevent them from happening in the first place. So let's dive in. Deal killer number 1 is political opposition, and this one can get your deal killed before you even get started. Your council member is literally your gatekeeper for your future development. Without them fully on board and fully trusting what you're doing, you're not going to get anywhere. Before even submitting your permitting or your zoning applications, make sure the first thing you do is go down and sit with your council member and talk through your development. That first meeting sets the tone for everything else that follows. And a close second to the council member is the local community group leader or the president of the community group. Whoever is leading that organization has a really good pulse of what the community wants and what they will support. Not only that, but the community trusts them as their leader and their voice of whatever they want in their community. And so if you can get their buy-in early on, then everybody else will likely follow their lead. I've seen this happen time and time again. Community groups who oppose new development, or not in my backyard, or also called NIMBYs, they argue that the new development will increase the traffic, change the neighborhood feel, lower property values, or put a strain on public resources, even in the face of an affordability crisis. You can't always stop opposition entirely, but what you can do is meet with community leaders early and often. Hold your community meetings and document the support along the way, so when it comes before a vote, either before your planning commission or council, then you can show that you have that support. Here's what that has looked like for one of my developments. We made the mistake of not properly engaging the community first, and this was early on in my career. The local neighborhood group felt like we were trying to go behind their back to get this approval, which was not at all the case. We just unfortunately were green and didn't know the process. But this put us at a disadvantage from the very start because they were hesitant to trust anything we were putting out there or anything that we were promising. And we had to work twice as hard to rebuild that trust. And we just came into the meeting with our site plan, and there were people basically like wanting to run us out of town and holding up signs saying, no way, we do not want this development. Like, it could not have gone worse because we didn't do the pre-steps ahead of time. And part of it was there's a single family neighborhood in the back, and we were putting our density toward the back of the site. So from this original community meeting, we went back to the drawing board. We didn't give up. And we basically said, hey, let's scrap the original plan. Let's start from zero. Let's take their input. Let's actually listen to them. Let's be a really good developer. And from there, we were able to assemble a little bit more land on the frontage where we could move more of our density toward the major roadway. And over the course of 4 meetings, over the course of 12 months, we were able to get to the point where we had letters of support and we had unanimous approval from the community. But it probably added significant timing and cost because we didn't do the pre-work and get their buy-in ahead of time. We had to go back and rebuild that trust over many months. So those community members that were literally ready to block us ended up being our biggest supporters because they felt heard and represented and felt like they had a say in this development process. The lesson here, build relationships before you need them and make it about the community and not about you. Deal killer number 2 is financing gaps. This is where your funding sources don't match your development costs. In affordable housing, or really any development, we structure our capital in what we call a capital stack. This is essentially just how you pull all your money together to fund your deal. So some will come from investors, some will come from lenders, and some will come from grants or local funding. Usually 40% comes from tax credits. This is where you sell the tax credits for cash in return. 50% from loans and 10% from grants or other soft funding. This is what we call gap funding. Here's the problem though. That final 10%, that gap filler, that is usually the hardest to find, and that is what separates deals that get built from deals that die on the vine. You can fund 90% of your deal with tax credits and loans, but if you can't get that last 10%, then that whole deal is dead. So where does this gap funding come from? There are actually multiple sources you need to be hunting for. You've got federal funds like home funds or CDBG funds. These come from the federal government by way of HUD, but they get allocated to state or local governments like your state housing agency or your local housing authority, and then they put out RFPs that you respond to apply for and receive the funding for your project. There's the National Housing Trust Fund, which serves the most lowest income residents, and there are project-based vouchers that you get from your local housing authority. Then there could be possible tax abatements, or what we call pilots, or payment in lieu of taxes, which get allocated from your local government. These can be huge. When we get a 10-year tax abatement on a 200-unit affordable community, that can be the equivalent equivalent of basically being able to borrow an additional $2 to $2.5 million of loans because we're not paying the real estate taxes. You can find out if your city offers this type of tax abatement by just Googling up your city and then affordable housing tax abatement or affordable housing pilot. You've also got cities setting up their own dedicated housing fund because the federal funding tools and the tax credits just aren't enough to fund a full capital stack for affordable housing. So like in Nashville, we have our Barnes Housing Trust Fund, which sets aside millions of dollars per year from the city's budget to go towards nonprofits doing affordable housing. The best way to look for this in your city is to go for your city's resources. Go to either the mayor's office, the Office of Community and Economic Development, the Housing Authority, maybe the Office of Housing, the Housing Task Force, or the Housing Trust Fund. Whatever the name is for within your city, that's where you can find these resources. But here's where I see most beginner developers make a mistake, and that's going after just one of these funding sources. Maybe they apply for just one of these funding sources and say, oh, okay, I did my application, here you go, get rejected, and then give up. Or maybe they get funding from one of these applications, think that that is enough, and then get down the line to where they get their final construction costs or interest rates skyrocket or some variable changes. And then all of a sudden that one grant that they applied for and maybe won is no longer enough to get the deal closed. The successful approach is what we call layering. We're basically applying for multiple grant funding sources either at the same time or back to back because you always are going to need more funding for your project than you really anticipate on the front end. Maybe you get a pilot that covers 5% of your gap, home funds that cover 3% of your gap, and project-based vouchers that cover the final 2%. Don't rely on one silver bullet to cover the entire 10% of your funding gap. So always be applying for more funding than you think you need at the beginning of a project because by the time you get to closing, you will always need more funding by then. Deal killer number 3 is environmental issues, and this one can blindside you if you don't catch it early. Let me tell you about a project we worked on in Huntsville. We had a 22-acre site under contract for $2.2 million. Everything looked great on the surface. It was in the path of progress. It was a great location, right next to a park system, right next to all the amenities, proper zoning. All of our boxes were checked. But when we did our phase 1 environmental study, which basically looks at all the environmental uses or previous uses that could be environmental concerns for a site, and also we did our geotech study, which basically looks at the soils and the quality of the soils underneath the surface, we found out that this site used to be used as a dumping site. And we had no idea when we first got under contract. The civil engineer told us it was going to cost roughly about $1.2 million to mitigate this problem. Here's how we handle this. We took the engineer's report back to the landowner, had a meeting with them, and said, look, we have a $1.2 million soil issue that if we move forward, we're going to have to take this on. Or if we don't move forward, whoever ends up buying your property will have the same exact issue. We negotiated with the seller to split this cost. So instead of us paying $2.2 million for the dirt, we had them lower the purchase price by $600,000. So now we're buying the land for 1.6 instead of 2.2. The lesson here is that environmental issues don't have to actually kill your deal, but you do have to navigate how to catch them early on and how to negotiate around them so you can still turn this into a deal that pencils and makes financial sense. Always, always, always do your phase 1 early on in your due diligence for any site and not after you've closed on the land. Deal killer number 4 is actually 2 problems: over-designing and under-designing. Over-designing is when you get too ambitious with your design. Maybe you go 7 stories on a building instead when you should be going 4, or you go way too big on the units, or you go way, way, way overboard with the amenities. In affordable housing, every dollar counts. You're not charging market rents, so you have to be very strategic about where your dollars go and be very cost effective on getting a good ROI on your building and your design. And also you have to stay within caps that are usually put on you by the funding sources, either the tax credits, the bonds, or the gap funding that you go after to help pay for your development. If you over-design your buildings, you either won't be able to pay for it because the gap will be too large from your construction cost to what the amount of funding you can bring to a deal, or you may be putting yourself at risk of going way over the limits of the funding sources that you need to stay compliant within to pay for your development. The best way to avoid over-designing is to get early cost estimates from your general contractor. They'll help you right-size your design before you overspend on plans. For example, if you have $25 million in funding and want to build a 100-unit development, then that means you have $250,000 per unit all in to go towards your building, your land costs, your soft costs, and your design costs. Your GC can help you dial in exactly what your building and your land costs need to be in order to hit that total overall budget. Under-designing is just as dangerous. This happens when you don't give your general contractor complete plans or you don't give them enough lead time to be able to properly price and value engineer your plans. Value engineering is basically a GC helping you make a building more buildable at a more cost-efficient price point. If you give your GC incomplete plans and ask for pricing, then you're inevitably going to have holes in your plans that they're just going to have to make best guesstimates on how to fill the holes. And when contractors have to guess, they typically are going to pad their numbers or make them more conservative because there's a lot of unknowns. I always recommend bringing your GC into the design process early. They have that builder's mentality and they know what things will actually cost. Here's a perfect example of this. On a recent project, we were deciding between either using white windows or black windows. The design called for black windows, but based on our prior projects, as the developer, we had assumed that the white windows would be a lot cheaper and be more cost effective than the black windows. We wanted the black window look, but we thought we'd eventually have to cut it out to make the financing work. Because we had brought our GC along in the design process early, then they were able to immediately go out to the market and get real-time data from their window manufacturer to figure out that black windows, the cost was almost about the same as maybe like $2 more per window. And for a couple hundred windows, we're like, you know what? For a multi-million-dollar project, that is worth it. Deal killer number 5 is market shifts. These are things that are completely outside of your control, like interest rates, policy changes, or economic downturns. Let's say you start a project when interest rates are 4% and you've structured your whole deal around this assumption. But then halfway through your development process, interest rates spike to 6%. Suddenly your permanent financing costs have almost doubled and your deal doesn't work anymore. Your development timeline is typically 2 to 3 years from start of getting a site under contract to breaking ground and starting construction. A lot can change in that time. Interest rates can move, construction costs can increase, local and state policy and even federal policies can change. You cannot prevent market shifts like this, but you can structure your deal to survive them. First, always build in contingencies into your deal. This is basically like your rainy day fund when things do not go according to plan. And guess what? They never go according to plan. Do not structure deals or do not even go forward with deals if they only work if everything has to be done perfectly. Assume that some things will go wrong. We always build in either a 5 to 10% contingency, both in our construction costs and in our soft costs or any of the added costs that go into a project. Second, try to lock in your financing terms as early as possible. If you can lock in your construction financing or your permanent financing at the very front end of a project, then that takes away your interest rate change risk all throughout construction. And third, diversify your funding sources. Don't rely on just one type of financing or one financing partner. Use tax credits, loans, grants, tax abatements, private dollars, donor dollars. You have to be looking under every single couch cushion to find every single coin that is out there to make your deal work. You need to have multiple sources and multiple relationships for capital sources lined up, so then if you have problems with one of them, you can always backfill it with other sources. Look, development is risky. There is no way around that. But the developers who succeed aren't the ones that avoid risk. They're the ones who understand risk and know how to navigate it. If you structure your deals conservatively, if you build the right relationships and you do your due diligence on sites, stay flexible, and keep multiple deals in your pipeline at all times, then you will be able to avoid or overcome any and all of these obstacles. And that's what separates the successful developers from the ones that fail on their first deal. If you're working on your first deal, start by listing out these 5 areas and which ones have you covered and which ones have you not covered. That one exercise will show you exactly where your biggest risks are. If you're serious about doing your first affordable housing development and don't want these deal killers to stop you, then join our affordable housing development program. It's the exact roadmap that I use to take deals from concept to closing step by step. I'll put the link in the description below. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.